Well, welcome back to the 10th episode of the Point of Order podcast, an inside look at California politics in the state legislature. I'm your host, Assemblyman Josh Hoover, and we are back after about a month break for legislative summer recess. And I'm joined today by a new guest on the show, a new co-host, Devon Mathis, Assemblymember for District 33. Devon has represented the 33rd District since 2014. Before joining the Assembly, he served his country for 10 years as a sergeant in the Army National Guard, including 2 tours in Iraq. During the second tour, Devon was injured in a roadside bomb attack for which he was awarded a Purple Heart. Devon, thank you for your service. Thanks for being on the podcast. How's it going?
We're back from summer break, so we'll find out here in a few hours.
I know, yeah. I know. We were just talking about that. Like, I'm trying to get back into the routine. I mean, I've been in my district. You've been in your district.
Well, the next 30 days will be a snowball. This week will be kind of slow, and everybody will start getting their feet under them, and then it'll just roll till the end.
Exactly. Well, you told me your watch is dead. I forgot my glasses in my car. We're really starting strong this week.
It's all good.
So tell us a little about your district. I know you're in the Central Valley.
Yeah. I think the easiest way to look at it is it's the ag center of the world. We host the World Ag Expo every year. Countries from all over come and check out what we do. We have more agricultural production than anywhere else. So, I mean, for us, our big issues are obviously water and the flooding this year, the Tulare Lake Basin and these issues that are going on. But it's, we have the issues everybody else. And I think a lot of people we're a flyover area in the southern San Joaquin Valley. And it's like, no, we still deal with the same issues. I mean, we're dealing with homeless and gangs and everything else that everybody has. And people forget that. And it's, the last 10 years in the legislature, it's like, hey, we got these rural agricultural issues, and these are the people that feed you guys. Yeah. And that's kind of an important thing.
And I feel like up here, we just, the legislature kind of forgets about them.
Well, the legislature in California, the majority likes to think we can offshore everything. And it's like, well, I'd prefer my food come from the safest, cleanest standards.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
No, it's a great point. I mean, it was, I was just touring my district recently, or actually, I guess it's our colleague Heath Flores' district. Parts of it too, and with our the Sacramento ag folks, and and just getting out there talking about the flooding, right? Talking about the damage that did, and the resounding impact that has over a number of years.
Oh, it's the number of years point is extremely important, because it's not just because the sun's out, everything's good. It's like, no, you're talking like in my area with Tulare Lake, it's going to be 2, maybe 3 years before that dries up. Yeah. And these are some of the largest ag production areas. So you're not talking about $1 million losses. You're talking about billions of dollars lost. Yeah. And food that's not going to people's tables. And
and costs, right?
And for years. And that's that's going to spike cost. That's going to affect global markets. And food security is national security. Yeah. In a lot of senses. Because a lot of the government, nationally, aid that we give geopolitically is through food.
Yeah. I went to lunch at a just tiny small business local place. Nothing, not a fancy place, just like a hole in the wall. $20 for like a wrap.
Well, that's
it's getting crazy.
Remember the old Subway commercial, right?
$5 footlongs. There's no more $5 footlongs.
$5 footlongs. That changed when we increased minimum wage. I try to tell people, I'm like, we forget about how just minimum wage increases everything, and it's margins of inflation, because you think, oh, it's just wages, but it's like. The wage for minimum wage goes up. So your cost of producing electricity goes up, which then increases the cost of power, the cost of fuels, the cost of raw materials, then the cost of production, then retail. So you get like 5 steps of inflation where the cost goes up every step before it hits your plate.
Well, I think minimum wage just went up again to 16. I think last month. Or
Keep going. Yeah. So we're
and
going to see.
well, and then that on top of, right, for businesses, if you're a business owner, on top of all the inflation that they're dealing with in other areas as well. It's just it's pretty hard. It's a hard time to be a business owner. That's for sure, especially in small business.
Hard time to be a Californian.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. Hard time to be a consumer. So on a lighter topic, I mean, did you do anything fun over your summer recess? Did you get to spend some time with the family?
Got a little bit of family time. Got a little some boogie boarding in with the kids, and
that's awesome.
Finishing up the final touches of some wedding planning and some other fun stuff.
That's exciting, man. That's really exciting.
It's a good time.
Yeah, we got out to Pismo Beach and did a little boogie boarding too. Although I kind of wussed out and just kind of stood in the ocean there at the beginning and watched my daughter like catch the waves because it was cold, man.
Oh, that's
I'm not as brave as I used to be.
Central Coast is where the Central Valley goes to play. So.
That's right. Yeah. No, I'm from Fresno originally, so going to Pismo was like an every year thing. We still go every year now. But
when I worked at Wild Water Adventures,
back
in the day, it was like we'd get paid, you'd pay your bills, and then you just drive out there and have a good time.
Man. It's a great place. It's still one of my favorite places. I just love. It's just very peaceful and. Yeah, I just love, my wife and I love it out there. But I definitely glad to be back. It was nice to spend a little more time in my district and, get to just connect a lot more with constituents and things like that and take the kids on a couple weekend trips. So, but back to the grind this week.
No, we should be talking about, like we did this stakeholder meeting and one of my fairgrounds got a huge grant for a resource center.
Oh, nice.
So, like our county fairs, we forget, people are like, oh yeah, it's just the big fair, but it's like when there's a disaster, this is where everybody goes.
Yeah, it's ground zero. Yep.
They need showers and kitchens and places for people to stay. And so there's grant money for that. And we help get that done. And
that's awesome.
A few other things. But it's, there's a lot of different things that people don't see every day that we're doing. And it's, people are like, oh, you guys are on a 30-day break. You're home playing video games and go to the beach. And it's like, but my phone's still on me and we're doing all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it definitely didn't feel like a vacation. It did feel like a break from the legislature, which is kind of nice. But, so we usually start out by just recapping the week before. Since it's been a month, some of these stories are, kind of just recapping what's been going on in California over the last few weeks. First of all, this isn't a California story, but definitely our hearts and our prayers are with the people in Maui right now.
Yeah.
Just the devastation that is going on in Lahaina, excuse me, and I think it's up to 96. You mentioned before the podcast.
Yeah, on my 4-hour drive up here, was hearing more about it in the updates.
It's just
I mean, you're talking
absolutely heartbreaking.
Close to 100 casualties, and then thousands are still missing. And I guess they're doing an investigation because they were like, oh, it's climate change, and that's an easy out, but. I mean, here, we saw PG&E go bankrupt because their lack of, power lines and their security caused some of the fires that we've had here that have been devastating in California. And I guess they're talking about, this might have been avoidable if these power companies would have done some of the same things we're doing here.
Yeah.
And it's, it's always hindsight's 2020, but it's devastating. Yeah. And, this is a real impact for people. And we need to be looking at, not just here in California, but nationwide.
Yeah.
Because when you travel the world, you go to other places and you look at how they're doing their infrastructure. And, things are underground, things are, easily repaired, things make sense, and it's very secure. And we've just got lines and stuff running all over the place. And it's like, okay, guys, let's, we need to fix this up.
No, it's now going to be the, looks like the, most deadly, I think, wildfire in the history of the United States at this point. Yeah. Just absolutely heartbreaking. Definitely, they're definitely in our thoughts and in our hearts right now. So I wanted to definitely give that a mention, even though it's not a California issue, because that is something that I think California is sending some support to them, and we definitely want to help in any way we can.
Yeah.
One of the big stories in my community this last week, or actually this last month, I should say, is our district attorney, who's new, sent a letter to Sacramento Mayor Darrell Steinberg, basically threatening a lawsuit unless he takes actions and enforces laws on addressing the homelessness crisis in our city and in our county, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Darrell's over the city, but if you look at Sacramento County, and I know.
Well, yeah, but with Sacramento, I mean, homeless has gone up, 250% since 17?
So in his letter, it's 250% increase since 2017. Absolutely crazy. If you look at, we actually surpassed San Francisco for the first time ever, which, San Francisco is always looked at as kind of the homelessness, or LA as the homelessness capital.
When I first started in Sacramento, you'd walk around, you walk down K Street and all these things, and you'd see a couple of people here and there, but now it's people are everywhere. Yeah, and it's, what's interesting is the DA did. I kind of pulled it up, and it was like, this is, they campaigned on this. They're like, no, we're going to go after this aggressively. Yeah, and I mean, it's good to see politicians holding to campaign promises, but the homeless fight. I mean, we could talk forever on homeless, but what's interesting is in other countries, if people are homeless, they take them, they pull them in, they get a hold of their family, they get a hold of people that they've worked with, and they get an option. Either you're going to go to jail and get cleaned up that way, or you're going to go to another type of rehab center. Either way, you're going to go get help and get cleaned up. And then when you're more cognitively functioning and you got your feet under you and can think clearly, then we'll come back and go, okay, what's the next step? And we don't do that here. Here, we're like, let's just give them services, but we're not. And we say, oh, it's homeless, it's this. Yeah. To me, one of the biggest factors I see is just the cost of living. Yeah. Oh, it's certainly a factor. And that's, people are always like, well, what are you doing? It's like, my number one thing I look at when I vote is this bringing down the cost of living? Is this helping families out or not? Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I mean, we used to do that other approach more in California before Prop 47, when we had drug courts, like a functioning drug court system. Judge Roper that created drug court is actually a family friend. Oh wow! And my aunt was one of his bailiffs. So as a teenager, you get dropped off, and it's like, well, you're going to go hang out with your aunt and uncle. But you got to wait till she gets off work. So you're going to sit in the back of drug court and watch. Wow. Yeah. But it had teeth. Yeah. And it was a really simple program. It was like, look, you're either going to get cleaned up and you can stay out of jail and stay home and get cleaned up and go through the program, and you're going to drug test. And if you test high, guess what? You're going back. Yeah. And we're going to get you clean in one way or another, but we're going to get you there. Well, yeah, and it's really about getting it's about getting people out of the cycle of homelessness, right? It's not. I think right now, but that's a mindset. Yeah, if you're homeless and you're using or anything's going on, and you're not in a stable situation, you're not thinking clearly. Yeah, and until you have somebody in a place where they can think clearly, where they're not thinking moment to moment, what's my next meal, what's my next high, what's my next whatever. And they can actually think more long-term and think about their future and be in a position to do so, they're not going to make sound decisions. Yeah. And I think right now, a lot of it is, let's get people into housing versus let's get people out of the cycle. Because I think, housing obviously has to be a part of that process, but if you're not addressing some of these root problems, correct, you're not getting people out of the cycle. So the housing's not going to get them out of that, you're not going to break the mentality that they're facing. So if you see some of the studies on some of these housing things, people have gone in and completely thrashed the housing. Yeah, because they're used to living on the streets. Yeah, and so for them, it's a mind shock, and they end up tearing the houses apart. Yeah, and sleeping, on the floors or on the patios or whatever, because they're like, they're not comfortable sleeping in a bed. They have PTSD from the streets. Yeah, so I love this letter that our DA wrote, because he's basically calling out the mayor for inaction on this, and he actually collected community input before he sent this letter. Yeah. So he in the letter, he says, we received over 1,600 responses in a matter of days. Residents reported they were assaulted at gunpoint by an unhoused individual. A girl's soccer game was postponed because of needles on the field. A homeowner was diagnosed with PTSD due to constant break-ins in their home because of an encampment across the street. Children have to walk through human feces and urine to get to school. And the mayor's response was basically that he's oversimplifying the problem. Here's the challenge I have with that response is someone has to get serious about this in Sacramento. And it hasn't been anyone else, really, in my opinion.
Little devil's advocate here, though.
Yeah.
Wasn't it a few months ago or last year, Steinberg got sued by homeless rights advocates because they built homeless shelters next to the highways.
It's true.
You know, so it's it's one of those you can't win to lose.
It is certainly a lose-lose in a lot of ways, but at the end of the day, we have to have the political will to say, what's going on? The status quo is not acceptable, right?
That's it.
And so
we got to stop putting Band-Aids on things.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's
for sure.
These are huge problems, and you can't. It's kind of like you're taking Tylenol for a brain tumor.
Yeah, yeah. In a related story, we kind of joke on this podcast that we always have to have a story about San Francisco. It's not on the notes, so we won't dive into this one too much. But seriously, it seems like every week there's a new story out of San Francisco. The one this week, the employees at the federal building in San Francisco were told to work remotely for the time being because of concerns with crime. I mean, it really is just, I only bring this up because it's like another example of, we need leadership. We're reacting to all of these problems, and we're forcing people to make huge life changes to adjust to it, but we're not fixing it.
Part of the issue with this is, you have, when we look at political parties and you look at how these things function, you had the left that was like, people can do these things and be free and very liberal. And then you have woke, and woke has turned this to like, well, you have a right to be homeless. And it's like, you shouldn't have a right to not have a home. Like we should have a system that is going to take care of people and get people into programs and get people help.
Yeah.
Not they have a right to stay there and be in a dire situation and that become the norm.
Right.
And it's one of those, it's definitely gone too far to the left, and people are going, well, wait a minute, this isn't what I grew up with. And I got Democrat buddies from college, and they're like, bro, it's not okay. This is not the Democrat Party I was cool with. And I'm like, well, there's room over here. But where's the common sense?
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned the right to be homeless. There's also legislation being pushed on the right to housing, right? Which I think is on the same, different side of the same token, but it's like, these are not, I have serious concerns with that legislation because, rights are not something to be taken lightly, right? And, communities need to come together to support each other, but a right to homelessness, a right to housing.
Josh, I'll tell you.
Very troubling way to go about fixing
Before I was elected in 2012, Governor Jerry Brown and the legislature passed the right to water. And that was during the big drought, which kind of led me to run for office because my hometown of Porterville was the city without water. And I mean, we had thousands and thousands of wells go dry just in one town. Thousands of people no running water. And they're like, well, California, you got a right to water. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean the state's going to go in and fix everybody's water?
Yeah.
Because that's not what happened. And so when the state legislature does these things, like we're going to do a right to do this, it sounds great in a headline for a campaign article and, propaganda. But the reality of it is the money for these things has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's got to come from somewhere, and somebody's got to pay for that. And what you're doing is you're taking away money from people that are working really, really hard to get by, to take care of families, to figure it out, and giving it to people who are choosing not to. And that's a fundamental issue that is going on more and more, not just in California, but across the country. And it's like, at some point, you got to get off your butt and work. And you can't complain and be like, well, everybody's going to give me everything. It's like, no, at some point, you have to put in some effort to get something. And if somebody else works harder than you and they get more than you, Like you can't play this equity game of like, well, they worked harder, so they have to give it to me. It's like, no, you got to go earn your own. And the old term, you gotta make your own bones.
It's definitely a mentality thing and a cultural shift, right?
So it's very Lenin versus not, but.
So, shifting gears to education, we had the state board adopted a pretty controversial math framework over the break. And, in a lot of ways, I mean, there's so many different levels of concern. There's some really, I think, questionable politics that have been injected into this framework, even though it is not as bad as the original proposal. They're injecting a lot of things that are not math into this framework. They're also, one of the things I was concerned about coming from a school board that there was a constant effort to do is to hold advanced kids back, to slow down how fast kids could advance, to get rid of honors classes. One of the things this framework does is it moves the timelines for math, so algebra gets bumped back farther, so you're taking it later, which really disadvantages kids that are pushing forward. I mean, this is, and again, not all my kids are honor students. This isn't this isn't really affect
mine either. I mean,
my kids at all. But
they're doing well. But
but we have to let kids reach their full potential and work at a pace that challenges them, and provide support for the kids that aren't doing that. But you can't hold everybody back. 100%. And I think that's what this is doing. And then the last thing that it's doing is we saw this actually in the reading thing. So they're moving to this new math approach where you're doing, I'm trying to remember the name of it now. It instead of repetition and multiplication and memorization, right? It's moving to a more question-based format of how to learn math, which most experts have said that is not the most efficient way to learn math. That's not the best way to learn math, and yet we're going that direction because I feel like education is very trendy. And we saw this with reading. We ran away from phonics many years ago.
Well, no, and that's well, we ran away from phonics, and our reading levels are some of the worst in the country.
Exactly.
And it's and not to jump ahead of you, but I mean, it goes to what has COVID done to our schools? What has happened in California? We spend more money than anybody else, and we have the worst education.
Yeah,
and they keep making it worse. And for our kids, whether they're advanced in reading or advanced in math, you need to let kids be kids.
Yeah.
And if the kid's more advanced, help them with that spot. If they're behind in another spot, a lot of kids that are good at reading suck at math and vice versa. And it's how do you balance it out? And you don't do that by, well, this kid's doing good, so let's pull them back. So this other kid, help them succeed. And I've seen this with charter schools where they do really well, and they're like, hey, this kid's in second grade, but they're at a third grade reading level, or this one's in third grade and they're at a fifth grade math level. Well, we're going to let them go do math in the fifth grade class because that's where they're at.
Yep.
And then where they're behind, we're going to help them and get them supports and tutors and provide the support to get them caught up.
Right. Yeah.
And it makes sense and it works. And those schools have higher rates. And their kids are doing better. And then you look at this other stuff where it's like, well, no, we're going to hold them back. And it's like, look, I get it. Not everybody and not every house has, a mom and a dad and everybody and family supports that are there to help the kids study and get them to stay on track. But if you pull down, you might have a kid who's going to the library and studying because they want to get out of the situation they're in and they're working hard. And that's what really concerns me because we hear stories. When I listen to podcasts, you get up and work out and you listen to these things and you listen to guys. And a lot of these guys came from being homeless. They came from some really hard knock stuff. And they talk about the struggle and how they chose to work through the struggle to lift themselves up to do better in life. And this punishes the kids that want to work hard. And if you take away the incentive to work hard, you're fundamentally cutting the legs out of society.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too because now we're really going the other direction. We're going back to phonics now in a lot of ways. A lot of the now experts are saying we need to shift back. So this to me just screams of something we're going to regret and we're going to go back on in 20 years. But the question is, what are the consequences during that period of time that our students face because of this approach that we're choosing to shift to with math in California? But to your point, one of the biggest concerns I have seen in the education space at the local level and at the state level has just been this movement to lower the bar, and because we as a state, you pointed out, we are failing in a number of categories. We're 50th in literacy. We're at the bottom, in the bottom 20% of all the lists when you look at every metric on reading and math performance, right? But instead of, changing our policy, instead of providing supports to the kids who need it and helping them reach the bar, we've decided it's just easier to take the bar and move it down for everybody. Well, and I think that's really a huge problem.
Tinfoil hat moment, right? The dumber the society is, the easier it is to control them. I mean, that's the worst, sad part about it. And we keep lowering standards. And then people don't understand what's going on. And then we lower the standards more.
Yeah.
And I mean, you and I deal with complicated things. We're going to spend the next month going through some very complicated legislation because all the heavy stuff comes out at the end.
Yep.
And, how many people, when we're back home and we're having these conversations and we're talking with people and, doing stakeholder meetings and how many people in those meetings, a lot of the time it's breaking down these complicated things and really letting people know what's going on. I mean, my area in the South Valley, when you look at the demographics, 80% of my people have high school education or less. 18% have an associate's or a bachelor's degree, and only 2% have a master's or higher.
Yeah.
And it's about making sure these kids have a place to go, have a home to go to, have a job, you can do economical growth. You can do all of these different things in a smart way.
Yeah.
Or you can do it in the way that we're doing. And we're creating brain drains in certain areas. We're disincentivizing people to push themselves harder to succeed.
Yeah.
And it's a gruesome society where there's no work ethic.
Yeah.
Because why would you work harder if you're going to lose?
Yeah, it's really interesting.
It's like you get punished for working hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really concerned about some of these trends, and I'm definitely concerned about this math framework. I think it's gonna lead to some years of further underperformance for our students, which is not good for the longevity of our state. But shifting gears, I know this is the last story in the recap. We'll move through this one pretty quickly, but I wanted to get your take because this PUC, Public Utilities Commission, just voted 3-1, I think, last week to expand autonomous vehicle testing in San Francisco, which obviously doesn't affect either of our districts. But I just thought it was really interesting. I know there's a lot of public outcry on both sides. I know the business community was strongly supporting it, but there was a lot of labor groups that were opposing.
Which business community?
I think the chamber or something.
Yeah.
But San Francisco Chamber. But Waymo and Cruise are going to be. Anyway, I wanted to get your take on it. I was curious if we were going to agree or disagree on this because I have my own take, but I was curious what your thoughts were on autonomous vehicles in general.
I just don't think they're there yet. And I mean, it's one of those things like, you've got to, run a couple betas.
Yeah.
And you've got to do it to get the technology there.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's the big bill our colleague Tom Lackey's on with the semi trucks.
Yeah.
And it's like, look, something that big, you probably need a human there to be able to say, okay, this thing's breaking down. We got to make sure, there's a safety protocol here. I mean, into that point, and I think Tom Lackey said it best. We don't put people up in commercial planes without pilots.
Yeah.
Even though they can fly themselves.
Yeah.
is there going to be a day in the future where we have, we grew up with like Back to the Future. Everybody's like, where's my hoverboard? Where's my flying car? Will we get there?
Yeah.
Physics, yeah, you could get there, but it's how well do you trust these systems? Because when you look at like some of the statements coming out from the first responders, they're like, this is blocking emergency vehicles. These things don't, it's not computing right. And yeah, they've got to be able to do it and work out the bugs. But at the same time, on the other side of that, you've got people that are like, what we had this big fight over Uber and Lyft drivers who are now going to be put out of work for this.
Yeah.
And it's ultimately, it's the guy that created whatever computer program in his mom's basement that's now a big tech guy that's making all the money.
Yeah. Well,
and how much money of that's going back to the community.
Yeah.
And then because it's corporate money and it's business money, that money's not really getting back into the tax revenue to pay for the other programs. It's not like they want to say it is.
Yeah, I've got a little bit different take on this. I mean, I think I think there's going to be a lot of growing pains, and I think you're right about that. I mean, there's a lot of bugs, there's a lot of things that need to be worked out. I think that's what these testing phases are for. But yeah, I mean, any major technological shift like this, there's going to be major growing pains, right? I think ultimately, though, I'm excited about this technology because I think it has the potential to make our roads exponentially safer at some point in the future, right? I mean, obviously, once we arrive at a point where they're ready for prime time, I mean, you're talking about. I mean, the biggest problem on our roads is not the cars; it's the humans. So, I think from a public safety standpoint,
human error is the biggest thing with computer problems. But
I'm excited about the potential future.
Well, yeah,
but I agree we're not there yet.
Potentially, I mean, that's one of those. The utopian vision is always really good. But what you got to do to get there isn't always so great.
I mean, there's always growing pains and major, technological advances. And I think, the potential for this to increase efficiency in our economy and create, new jobs and different jobs, I think is there too. So, time will tell. We'll see. Maybe next podcast
there's a balance that's got to be had as technology grows.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting to see how it works. And then politically, you see big tech throw a lot of money to lobby these things. And then you see the unions show up and it's like, okay, when you're trying to get growth, it's what's the right balance.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the best policies that I've seen in the last decade are where both sides leave a little mad because they didn't all get what they wanted, and it's somewhere in the middle.
That's a fair point, right? Well, let's shift gears, looking ahead now, moving beyond the recap. What's coming down towards the legislature over the next few weeks? So, according to Chris McCaley, who's we've had on this podcast, but
Chris is a great guy.
Kind of a staple here in the Sacramento policy community. 920 bills remain for the final stretch. 600 assembly measures that are the Senate's probably dealing with, and then 320 Senate measures pending in our House, these are approximate numbers. Today's August 14th when we're recording this. It'll come out in a couple days, but this is our first day back. Our goal is to adjourn by September 14th. What are you looking forward to?
Well, we'll adjourn by the 14th because it's the first year of the 2-year cycle. Yeah.
So we definitely will.
It's there's maneuvers and plays that can be done to kill things on the final hour, but those will be some fun things next year. But it's what's going to happen over this next 30 days is this first week back, everybody's going to get their bearings. Things are going to start going.
Yeah.
The body's going to start moving. Everybody's going to kind of wake up. And then next week it'll be some more committees and all of that. And then the final 2 weeks is just going to be more floor session. And that final week will just be floor session after floor session.
Yeah, but lots of coffee.
But the reality of it is that any of these things that fell, people are going to be like, "Oh, it failed, it's dead," and it's like, no, this is just the beginning because we'll come back in January and it'll start all over again.
That's true,
and I think that's important for the public to recognize is that once an idea is out there, it doesn't die.
Yeah.
And it's going to come back, and it's going to come back, and it's going to come back. And you really have to change the mentality of society, the mentality of commerce, the mentality of people. And it's that old saying, you get what you vote for.
Yeah.
And in California, we've got a mega majority, and there's different agendas. We'll see fights between the, I call them green socialists, because it's like the environment's everything and they don't care about anything else. And then you have more moderate, the mod Dems that we work with quite often. And it's really, how do you thread the needle to try to drive policy to make things better? But at the same time, how do you draw, because what you and I do inside the dome across the street, not a lot of people see. People talk about the sausage making and all these other things. Then you got people, the pundits that are like, oh, you better have a seat at the table. And I'm like, bro, I want to be in the kitchen. I'll serve it up to you. You can eat what we cook up. But, I spent 10 years in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And, we've worked on all these major deals, everything from cap and trade to a few things before that to all these big things. I've been in the mix, and it's a lot. And it takes a lot of political will, because people on both sides are going to beat you up for it. but it gets things done.
Yeah.
And it moves the ball. And what we really need in this state are people that are willing to say, look, politics be damned. This is what the people really need.
Yeah.
Because,
doing what's right.
But political campaigns in this country are a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yeah.
The parties are going to make money. Both sides are going to fight. And when there's peace and there's order and everybody's working together, it's like, well, what is there really to campaign about if everybody gets along?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
And so there's always got to be a wedge issue. There's always got to be something to fight about. And our jobs, once you're elected, is, well, where's the middle ground? How do we make this work? And then there's, people out there on both sides that are like, no, your job's just to go and fight. And it's like, dude, I'm not a little kid screaming and throwing a tantrum and yelling at the wall, because it's not going to get anything done. We have people that are in dire need, that need help. Our education system's jacked up. Homeless is jacked up. We have food insecurities going on. The list goes on and on and on. And what's crazy is California is the 4th largest economy on this planet. And for me, we still have third world conditions.
Highest poverty rate in the United States.
And it's like, I spend time overseas. Boots on ground in third world countries. And when you look at how our infrastructure's fallen apart and our education system is falling apart, and it's like, what are we doing? And we put so much effort on these top tier, on this know thyself stuff. It's like, what are all the headlines? It's about transgenders in schools and sports and this. And it's like, look, you can support gays and not support that. You can do different things that make sense. But we're spending all our time, money, and effort on these very wedged social issues instead of spending the time, money, and effort on fixing our infrastructure, on fixing housing, on, think about the cost of electricity and how it keeps going up and up and up. If we want to fix homelessness, we need to bring the cost of power down. You need to bring the cost of utilities down. You need to bring the cost at home down. Whether you're a single person that's fresh out of college or out of a trade school or out of whatever, you need to be able to get by. And have a way to do that and have it be affordable. And right now, that's not the case.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that your point about we need something to fight about, because what we end up generally fighting about, we meaning like just, in this partisan or political culture that we are in, it's generally the social issues, right? Those are generally what are viewed as more of the wedge issues that the parties fight over or that people fight over. But at the end of the day, there is so much work to be done outside of those issues on real issues that affect not that those aren't real issues, but on like tangible issues that
Yeah.
affect everyday Californians when it comes to cost of living, cost of housing, cost of utilities, cost of food, right? And so I think that is where you're right. We are elected to do the right thing and to focus on those issues. And I think that's we definitely, more attention needs to be paid. You also made a point about the bills never dying. So there is a proposal coming back to us, hasn't been introduced yet or gotten amended yet, right? So a gut and amend would be where you take a bill and basically delete all the contents, put something totally new in it. There's a proposal to do that in the final month of this session with a bill, always is, right? With a bill to give unemployment benefits to striking workers. This was a proposal, to your point, that was brought up in 2019. It was killed.
We stopped it. It's a zombie now.
Now it's back, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think that was a very, I was curious what your thoughts were on that bill, but really, I mean, you were around. I wasn't around. You were around when you stopped it the first time. Does it have a chance of passing this time? I mean, what do you see?
Obviously, members have changed. Membership's different. You didn't have the writer's strike going on. And I was down in that area. I got a buddy that's down there and had to go down to Irvine for one thing. And it's like, well, hey, let's stop and grab lunch and catch up with an old college buddy. And we're there in Hollywood, walking by. And he's like, oh yeah, there's those guys. So use this road. But this is where we get the concerns of becoming a total welfare state. It's like if you're in a union, you have the ability to strike. You have those things. Those things they're negotiated, and you've seen this. I mean, you've been on school boards, and those things are negotiated. But to be able, and if you're already unemployed, there's nothing stopping you from showing up and doing a rally or going on a strike or a march or whatever. You have the freedom to do that. So what really calls into question is, do you have the freedom? Should you have the ability to say, I'm gainfully employed and I'm working, but I'm pissed off at my work. So pay me so I can go complain louder. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good.
And there's already abilities where if your work's not true, you can sue. I mean, we're the most litigious state in the country. So, I mean, except for maybe New York, I think we fight back and forth for who's worse.
Yeah.
But you can already sue. There's so many workforce things that are out there that protect you. And so if, somebody can go on leave for emotional distress for weeks. I mean, you can literally go out on workman's comp for emotional distress. Yeah. So is this really necessary?
Yeah.
Are there not enough laws on the books that already protect the worker who wants to go strike? I mean, if you want to go strike. But if you're asking the rest of society to pay for you, while you go do it, that's a whole different question.
Yeah. So Cal Chamber came out, not surprisingly, opposed to this proposal.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Cal Chamber's going to call us a job killer right off the bat.
But I think they made an important point, and so they put out this statement. California's UI system is already $18 billion in debt. That's our unemployment insurance system. Adding more costs to this an insolvent system will extend the tax increases already underway from COVID-19. These tax increases will hit all California employers regardless of size, serving as a deterrent to hiring and future investment in California economy. I think it's pretty hard to deny that will be the result of this, passing. So it'll be a really interesting one to watch. It's something I'm definitely concerned about. And I mean, our unemployment insurance system is not a model for the nation.
No, it is a disaster.
It's a disaster. And our employers are the ones that are going to be paying it back for the next 10 years because of, it's so fascinating to me. The government told them, certain parties will blame the pandemic, but the reality is the government told businesses they had to shut down. Mm-hmm. Those businesses then...
Well, let's rewind it. Not so much the government, the political party that has the majority and calls the shots for the government.
Sure. In California government, the government, yes, that was.
There's a political ideology that happened across this state and across this country, and you can look at it, and it's a very distinct blue versus red mentality on this. And the states that were blue-pilled are suffering, and the states that stayed open and they got accused of horrible things are the ones that are succeeding right now.
Yeah,
that everybody's moving
certainly on a recovery
that are on everybody's moving to these areas.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the growth rates in like Idaho, in Tennessee, in Florida, people are, California, we lost in the first quarter, we lost over 200,000 residents. For the first time in our history during our redistricting.
Yep.
We lost a congressional seat, which is unheard of. And so.
And we're projected to lose 5 more.
Which
is crazy.
And we're losing more because people are leaving because these policies are flawed. They don't work. I mean, we saw the EDD fraud, these contracts, and they're no bid contracts.
Yeah.
Which for those people that don't know what a no bid contract is, that means the person giving the contract is just saying, hey, my buddy over here is a good guy. We're going to give him a contract.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a lot like the Biden administration, but it's that's how these things work.
I think what's most frustrating to me is, the way our system works is when our unemployment insurance system goes into debt, we take a loan out from the federal government. That loan gets paid back by employers. And we are in
and the
huge
employers have no
of
control
debt right now. They have zero. It's a payroll tax. They have to pay it on every employee. And we are going to be paying the current debt back for the next decade, probably.
So
these employers are. So
back
to
the cost. So back to the margins of inflation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Not only do you have the minimum wage go up in each of those steps, but now those employers in each one of those steps are paying into this too. Yeah. So that's an additional cost that goes through, again, every step of the way, because you've got to generate electricity, you've got to do water, you've got to be able to get fuel just to have a standard business.
Yeah.
And then you've got to get the raw materials.
Yeah.
Those have to get processed into a product, and then that product gets sold in retail. And so these costs are affecting every employer across the board. So the minimum wage goes up. This tax goes up. And you don't see it because it's not on your receipt.
Right, right.
No wonder why they want to get rid of receipts because then you can't even see your taxes. But I mean, it's our dollar is being completely devalued. And if you go back and you look at Germany in between World War I and World War II, there's pictures of them, their dollar was basically worthless. And they were using it as installation and everything else. And people were showing up with wheelbarrows full of money. But now, where's your money at? It's all electronic. It's on a device.
Yeah.
So you're not carrying around thousands of dollars. Your Happy Meal you used to buy your kids, your $5 footlong.
It's not as noticeable, but it is happening for sure.
You don't notice it because you're not pulling out cash to pay.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You're taking your phone, you're going boop, they're walking away.
Always, right?
So
yeah, just goodness. So real quick, because I want to get to our clip of the week, and we're about out of time, but real quick, just for fun, do you have any advice that you'd give to, if you were starting now with all the things that, or maybe your younger self when you started in the legislature? By the way, the listeners don't know, but we're actually seatmates on the assembly floor too. So you've given me a lot of this already.
I warned you about this question. I was going to say, so Josh, so seatmate, what do you remember from me being like do's and don'ts and all of this? Because it's and people don't, you did the introduction, but I'm also, chair.
Yeah.
For the caucus, I'm over all the caucus organization and making sure, all of our freshman members' offices are up and running and everything's going right, and you guys are being mentored and all of that. So
absolutely.
you've been. I know I've given a lot of advice, so I'm curious. I'm curious to what you remember the most.
Well, I just like when we're on the floor, like voting on legislation, or even thinking about speaking on legislation, which I mean, both of us are pretty intentional, right? When we speak on the floor, right? You know, every member has kind of a different approach on this. Some never speak at all. You'll never hear them talk ever once in their career. And then you've got other people that'll speak on everything. You know, they're learning. And then, you know, you and I think have a similar approach, which is, you know, look, if it's something, you know, we want our words to mean something, right? So when we speak, we want people to listen. And so we're going to be very intentional about when we speak and what we say. And I think that is something that I think you have given a lot of direction on and guidance on and advice on that I've really appreciated, because it's really important that, you know, people listen when you talk. And if you get a reputation for talking on everything, people kind of start tuning you out, right? And so I think that's been good. You know, you'll lean over and be like, "Yeah, this one's not worth it," or this, you know, this one's, you know, or yeah, you could talk on the or whatever, you know. So it's kind of funny, but I think that's good wisdom coming from someone who's been around.
It's I spent 5 years as whip and then chair of operations, and it's I think a lot of the stuff is you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. And when you're new, you've got to be open to taking the advice. Yeah. And it's hard. And, you know, I've got a lot of different political advice over the years, you know, like don't hire somebody else's turd. Or, you know, everybody in politics is like a pretty flower, but each one of those petals is a dagger to stab you in the back. And it's like, you know, I see it, and maybe it's because I'm a military guy, you know, grew up with the whole warrior's ethos, and your word is your honor bound and these types of things. But it's being intentional is extremely important in this business. The old adage of my word is my bond. Yeah. And in politics, that means something. It carries weight. It carries power. Absolutely. And I think too often in politics, people confuse money with power. And true power is influence. It doesn't matter if you got $1 million in your campaign account or, you know, 50,000 in your campaign account. When you speak, do people listen? Do you have gravitas? Are people going to pay attention to what you say? And are they going to talk about what you say? Because that word of mouth that you create is going to spread faster and be more valuable than any campaign ad you do or anything else you'd spend money on. Because if you open your mouth and you talk and people listen and they're talking about what you're saying and having conversations about that, that's invaluable.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, hey, let's wrap up with our clip of the week. I wanted to show you this clip because I watched it yesterday, I think. And I'm like, oh, this is the clip for this week. So let's play it, and then we'll get your thoughts on it.
All right. What do we got here?
We're dealing with learning loss from the pandemic.
Yes, no doubt.
A lot of people were operating in good faith during the pandemic, but now we have the opportunity to look back at that with 2020 hindsight and analyze what we did right, what we did wrong. Sure. Knowing what we know now, did we keep schools in California closed for too long?
You know, it's hard to say. 1 million people died from COVID, and I think that California took the right measures to keep everyone safe. Our biggest challenges, I think, around learning loss stem from the fact that we went into the pandemic with 1 million students who did not have access to a computer or access to high-speed internet. I don't know how that exists in California, but since then, we've made sure that we've provided 1 million computers and funding to have broadband all across the state.
But we know that California kept schools closed longer than other states that did not have catastrophic health outcomes by bringing students back. I mean, if we were to go through another pandemic and you're in charge, either as superintendent or governor or some other role, what are the lessons learned from what we did right and what we did wrong?
Well, pandemic is a worldwide epidemic that most of us have never been through. This is probably the hardest moment that any of us are going to go through in our lifetime. And I think everyone was working hard to get our schools open. It's a big, complex state. We have 1,000 school districts. They each have their own school boards making decisions. And so we have to always work hard to get communication across. And I would just say that coming out of the pandemic, you'll see California spending more to have universal meals and preschool for all of our students. It will take years for some of our students to recover, but there are ways to support their academic achievement and their mental health and social needs. And so we have to keep working together and focus more on solutions rather than on blame.
All right. So
it's a great answer.
I want
it's a very political answer, and he didn't answer the question.
Yeah, I want to get your thoughts, but I want to set the table because
Okay.
I mean, okay, his answer was, or the question was, did we close schools too long? His answer was, it's hard to say. It's absolutely not hard to say, from my opinion. As someone who was on, I know you were here during the pandemic, right, in the legislature.
Yeah.
As someone that was on a school board during the pandemic.
Dude, I got 5 kids. They're all in school.
You were a parent. I was a parent. We were both parents.
And I got 2 with special needs.
Yeah. We had kids during the pandemic dealing with this nightmare. And I will not mince words on this because it was absolutely a mistake what California did. We kept schools closed far too long. We had the longest school shutdowns in the entire country. And, you know, it's funny because this is State Superintendent Tony Thurmond, who I believe is also running for governor now, apparently, I think. Or is he rumored to be? I could be. It's funny, Elix kind of mentioned, but he's rumored to maybe be interested in running for governor. But the point is,
no, he's got to park money somewhere.
You know, he mentioned, you know, we've got 1,000 school districts. Guess what? You could have given them local control and allowed them to operate on the way their communities, the way their voters, the way their students and families and teachers and leaders wanted to operate, but you didn't. The state forced them to operate all under a single framework. Versus
I had one small district that was like, no, we're not going to do this, and they got cut off from their funding. So it's like, oh, do what we say, or else.
Yep. Oh, absolutely.
And that's but that takes away from the local control. So his answer is a complete cop out because you can't say, oh, there's all these thousands of districts doing all these different things. No, they did what you told them to do, or you pulled their funding.
Yeah.
It was under threat and under distress.
Yeah.
And it was a complete mess. And the reality of it, Kevin Kiley, because you watch the questions going on in Congress about this.
Yeah.
And when they look at it, it's the numbers speak for themselves. California made the biggest mistakes when it came to COVID for our kids, period. And you can try to say, oh, well, the best thing we can do going forward. Well, yeah, that's great. That's going forward. But it's like, did you actually learn from your mistake or not?
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of parents want to know is this system, I'm supposed to trust sending my kids to school. And when you look at legislation in front of us now, and you look at the history since COVID, it's, well, do I trust my kids to go to school? They're going to do this stuff. You want to hire thousands of more counselors, and you say it's for COVID, but then we have this stuff where, I mean, think about this. As a parent, at 12 years old, your kid can go to school, get an abortion, and you won't know. Decide they're a different sex, and you won't know. And the legislation in front of us, I think it's over in the Senate now, is that if we don't agree with our 12-year-old kid who has no idea what's really going on in the real world, they're going to be able to get a break from the parents and get put into foster care. How insane is that? And you want to hire thousands of more counselors? Is it really for anxiety in this? It's just what they've done is take away the trust for parents with schools, period.
Yeah.
And it's
there has been a lot of loss.
Very, very challenging. Sure. It's why we see the growth of charter schools. It's why we see legislation designed to kill charter schools. It's why we see these different things. I mean, I was listening to the head of the teachers union, do this commercial about how they're doing community-based schools and all of this. And it's like, well, yeah, that's great. And maybe that's a way for you guys to combat the growth of charter schools. But as a parent, I want to make sure my kids are going to go and learn and not, leave the social dynamics to the parents.
Well, and I think that's a big reason why you're seeing an enrollment crisis in traditional public schools too. You hear about it all the time. Enrollment is falling. Well, maybe we need to get politics out of the classroom and actually start teaching kids how to read.
You can be as liberal or as conservative as you want.
You can be on either side of the spectrum, but those kids are still your kids.
Yeah.
And you're still legally responsible for that child until they're 18.
Yeah. It's, I think what makes me so angry about this clip, and I think Tony is right about one thing. It's really critical that we shift to, addressing mental health in our students and addressing learning loss.
I've got one that's terrified.
Yeah.
Of school, of traveling, of all these things, because you see the statistics from COVID, and it's like, you got a higher chance of dying in a car wreck from COVID. Well, now he doesn't want to go in a car.
Yeah,
and it's like, dude, you got to go to school, and once he's at school, he does great. But this is really messing with those fundamental imprints of our youth. And we've got to ask ourselves, what is society going to look like 10, 20, 30 years from now? And the problem, one of the biggest things I've seen in California is we're very short-sighted in what we do. And it's like, we're going to go here, and if that doesn't work, we're going to jump here. And there's a lot of legislation that I've seen over the years where we will pass a program, and 2 years later, they're going, oh, well, that program doesn't work.
Yeah.
And it's like, it takes years to get a program on its feet. You've got to get the framework put out. You've got to get people hired. You've got to get people trained, and you've got to take this time to do these things. And instead of being patient with programs and working it out and looking at, well, how do we make things better? It's like, no, let's throw that out the window and let's do another thing. The other big mistake that we make is we just pour money into things. And it reminds me of, if you ever bought an old car that was a lemon, it's like you keep putting money into it and you keep putting money into it and you expect it to work. Better.
Yeah.
And it doesn't.
Yeah.
And I know that's counterintuitive to the whole, like, stop making new programs, but it's like, you can't just say, well, we spent more money than anybody else.
Yeah.
Let's pat ourselves on the back. It's where's the metrics? In the military, you look at, does it function? Did it work? It's not about how much money and how much time you spent on it.
Yeah.
It's about efficiency. Does this work? Is it efficient? Does it get the job done with the minimal amount of resources?
Yeah.
With the minimal amount of resources. If I can get something done and it costs less money, less time, but I get a better outcome, then that's the better way to do it. Not spend more money and more time and have a worse outcome.
Yeah.
But I get to brag because I spent more money.
That's how we measure success in California sometimes, though. It's frustrating. Actually, Tony and I were just on a panel together about education funding in California with the Public Policy Institute of California the other day. And, we had our disagreements and our agreements. I mean, there were areas of agreement, but
I worked with Tony.
I worked with Tony.
Him and I were freshmen together.
I work with him a lot on the education committee, but at the end of the day, it's not, funding isn't everything. You can pour as much money as you want into something, but if the policies don't actually get results, that money is not going to be the answer. So I think what makes me so angry about this one, and then we'll wrap up, was just that we now know it was a mistake. So to not acknowledge that it was a mistake to close schools, even now, to me is just unforgivable. Everyone knows on every side of the aisle, it doesn't matter what your political party is. It doesn't matter if you're a parent or not a parent. The data shows us now that it was a failed policy to close schools for as long as we did, that it did not improve health outcomes, that it harmed kids immeasurably, and yet we can't even acknowledge our mistake. That's what frustrates me as much as it does. Because this is the time now to say we made a mistake and we can never let that happen again.
You ever seen a kid get in trouble and then they lie about it? It's like, oh, I messed up. And it's like, hey,
that's fair.
Well, you want to explain, you got this candy wrapper in your pocket and chocolate on your face.
Right.
Did you eat the candy bar? And they're like, no, absolutely not. And they dig themselves into a bigger hole.
A lot of
And the sad part is this is what's happening, is we have people that are elected to these great positions of power that are digging themselves in a hole because they don't want to admit they were wrong. And what's horrible about that is the hole that they're digging affects all of us. It affects our state. It affects our future, our kids, our grandkids. It affects the whole entire thing.
Yep. And
they're digging us deeper into a hole instead of just owning up to, hey, we screwed up, we got it wrong. And, you know, one of the first things, my master's is in public relations. We took these classes, and it's like the first thing you do when you screw up is you own up to it.
Yep.
You say, hey, here's where we screwed up.
Yep.
Here's what we're going to do to move forward. And then you go.
Yeah.
And it's like, but you own
Can't
up.
fix it
but
if you
you
don't
have
own
to
up.
own up to the original sin.
Yeah.
And the original sin is they shut us down for way too long.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's I mean, we could debate whether we should have shut down or not. But the fact is, nationally, when the feds were saying, hey, this is we need to start opening up. Yeah. And California hung on for another year. Why? Because we had contracts, no bid contracts we had to fulfill.
Oh,
and as soon as those contracts were over, we opened up.
I could, and maybe I will, do a whole podcast on being on a school board during COVID. It was wild. But hey, I've kept you way too long. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
I gotta go get to a briefing.
Normally,
so then we can turn around
thoughts,
and brief you guys.
We gotta go. We gotta get to floor session here shortly. This podcast will return next week. Really, thanks for coming on. Anyone, listeners, can share ideas for future shows at pointoforderpod@gmail.com. Listen and follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can watch and subscribe on YouTube at Point of Order Pod. Follow the pod on Twitter or X, whatever you call it now, Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at Point of Order Pod. And you can follow both of us hosts on Twitter at Joshua_Hoover for me. And then for Devon, it's at Devon J. Mathis. Devon is spelled Devon. I think that's your Twitter account. So give Devon a follow.
That's my personal wise guy one versus
all right, good.
My state one.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Yeah. Well, I like the personal ones. You know, you retweet me a lot. So, hey, Devon, thanks so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, man. Absolutely. And, you know, keep it up. It's cool to see you do this. It's a lot of work to do a podcast and keep it going.
Appreciate it.